What is your assessment of what's unfolded in the last 2 to 3 days?
Well, Chinese officials and scholars who contact me are trying to figure out what is the real intention of the U.S. government at this point. They see the U.S. Being rather confrontational in a very public way vis-a-vis the Chinese leadership, and it seems that either you're trying to expect that the Chinese leadership will back down publicly, which is extremely unlikely, or that you don't actually really want them to come back to the table. And so they're questioning U.S. motives. At the same time, they look at the President's invocation of IEEPA and apparently ordering American companies to look at ways to leave the country. And they say, well, is this serious? If it is serious, then this is a very dramatic change in the bilateral relationship, and it'll have profound impacts on the global world order. And if it's not serious, then why is the president doing this? So there's a lot of confusion on the Chinese side, and it makes it wonder how they should even be approaching the negotiations at this point.
I mean, you're a lawyer by training. Does the US, does Trump have the power, using those laws, using that policy, to indeed order US companies to divest from China?
Well, he would have to phrase what he orders in certain ways, but I think under the law he does have a lot of power, and so this could be challenged either in the courts, or it could be challenged by the U.S. Congress passing some new legislation. Passing the legislation might be possible, but then it'd have to be veto-proof, so that's not a very practical way. The courts are very respectful of a president's prerogative to declare what a national emergency is. And so if the president declared a national emergency, the courts would have a hard time feeling that they should overturn that. So the most likely way to push back on that would be through normal politics, for the president's own party to come to him and say, look, we got to think this through. It's going to have a devastating impact on the U.S. economy and on other U.S. interests. And I think it's very unlikely that the president would actually proceed against such political pressure from his own party and from others, and from the business community, of course.
And Tim, I was wondering what the implications are now if something like this were to kind of push forward. We were speaking to some trade experts that saying at first, U.S. companies perhaps were tapping the brakes when it comes to investment. Would this actually kind of be full stop now? You would just step on the brakes and no investment at all into China? And what would that mean in terms of sourcing outside of the country, too?
So companies already are facing a lot of uncertainty. It's been the case ever since these trade negotiations began. And the longer the certainty persists, the more companies have to very responsibly look for other places to manufacture their products, to source them, and they have to be thinking about other markets in which to sell them. And of course, this is two ways. The Chinese companies have to be doing the same thing. So if your goal happened to be that you wanted to see the two countries decouple economically, then maintaining the stalemate is helping to achieve that goal already. And it seems that there are some people that think that that would be the best result in the relationship, but I think most people, and certainly the business community, don't agree with that.
Tim, we've had a full weekend since the news broke, of course, on Friday. Have your members, not from the weekend, but obviously the last few weeks, have your members actually encountered difficulties operating in China?
Well, I think from time to time you see local officials who think that the patriotic thing to do is not to be quite as friendly or open to American companies, but that's certainly not uniform. I think a lot of people are trying to emphasize that we're still welcome here. So I think you see a mixed picture, but the longer this goes on, the more concerned people are that the business conditions won't be favorable. The Chinese government has indicated that they're about to release their first iteration of the unreliable entity list. And they could do that even as early as this morning. And if you're on that list, then I think your business in China is going to be very, very severely hampered. So there's a lot of concern about how the Chinese side will react to some of the things that the U.S. is doing. Now, let me emphasize, the business community believes that there are serious issues that need to be addressed, and that these need to be addressed in a very determined way. But we're not convinced that the way we're addressing them right now is most likely to be most successful.
Tim, you've made that message pretty clear over the last few months, over the course of the trade war. The problem is that the Trump administration are not hearing it. and the hawks are increasingly, if not completely, in the ascendancy now. What more can the corporate lobby groups, can the business community do to convince the Trump administration that this is a dangerous course of action?
Well, I think one thing to remember is the Trump administration isn't as uniform in policies as we typically see in an administration. I think there are hawks and there are people that are trying to be more constructive. And I think that the trade negotiators themselves are being very professional from both sides. And I think if you left this to them, they could probably hammer out a deal that would be a big step forward for both countries and would put us on a more sustainable footing. There's more work to be done, but I think our hope is that the most senior leadership will give the negotiators some space to get their job done.
Just very quickly, last one, September the 1st, are those, or the September talks in DC, are they going to happen, do you think?
You know, it's looking really hard to see how they can, because if you're a trade negotiator walking into a meeting under the current circumstances, you're going to wonder where is this going to lead? I mean, the U.S. is wondering whether the Chinese are really ready to put something on the table, and the Chinese are wondering whether the U.S. is really interested in considering the Chinese best offer. So I think even if they meet, I think the chance that they're going to make a lot of progress in the short term is pretty minimal.